On July 18th, 2021, the Mukadam family was preparing for Eid, a time of joy and celebration, unaware that their lives were about to be forever changed by an unimaginable tragedy. In the morning, as the sun rose over the city, Noor's mother sent a servant to wake her, but Noor wasn't in the room, her bed undisturbed, her belongings untouched. Noor wasn't answering her phone either. Panic set in. Desperate, the family reached out to everyone who might knew her whereabouts, including her old friend, Zahir Jaffer. At first, there was no response, but then Zahir called back. He reassured Noor's mother, "She's not with me." All hell broke loose when Noor's father, Mr. Mukadam, received a devastating phone call from the police. A call that would shatter his world. His daughter's beheaded body had been discovered. The sheer brutality of this case jolted entire Pakistan and sparked outrage among people. To understand what led to this unimaginable moment, we must retrace the tragic and dramatic events that unfolded in the days prior. On October 23, 1993, Shaukat Mukadam, a Pakistani diplomat stationed in Jordan, welcomed a daughter, and they named her Noor. Over the years, Shaukat Mukadam served as Pakistan's ambassador to Kazakhstan and South Korea. Noor grew up living and studying in several different places, such as Pakistan, South Korea, and Kazakhstan. In her 20s, she moved to the United States, where her older sister was already residing, while the rest of her family relocated back to Pakistan. Despite her privileged upbringing and opportunities, Noor felt unfulfilled, as though something was missing. A few years later, she decided to return to Islamabad, Pakistan. The Mukadam family was financially well off and socially well connected. Family gatherings and dinner parties were a regular occurrence, and it was during one of these gatherings that Noor met 30-year-old Zahir Jaffer. Zahir, a dual citizen of the US and Pakistan, was born into an immensely wealthy and privileged household. His father, Zahir Jaffer, owned multiple businesses and also had contracts with Pakistani military. Though heir to significant wealth, Zahir chose to study psychology in the US and worked as a counselor at a center called Therapy Works. Zahir was reserved and introverted by nature. He mostly kept to himself. Noor, in contrast to Zahir, was outspoken and had a gentle, compassionate soul. On her birthdays, Noor had a unique tradition. She would buy toys and drop it off to orphanage, spreading joy wherever she could. She also loved animals. As Noor and Zahir spent more time together, their friendship gradually blossomed into a romantic relationship. Those around Zahir noticed a sudden and significant change in him. He became more social, enjoyed going out, and appeared to genuinely enjoy life for the first time in a long while. It seemed as though Noor was the missing piece in his life. This transformation was evident in moments like the one captured in a video of Noor and Zahir dancing together, looking like a couple destined for a bright and beautiful future. But beneath the surface, there were signs of trouble. While Noor and Zahir appeared madly in love, their fights were intense and tumultuous. Friends and family brushed these arguments off as the growing pains of a new relationship. However, time would reveal just how wrong they were. Zahir was both emotionally and physically abusive, and his struggle with drug addiction only worsened his behavior. Under the influence, he would transform into a completely different person. Noor felt increasingly suffocated in the toxic relationship, unable to find peace. After 3 years of suffering, she finally found the strength to walk away. She ended the relationship, determined to reclaim her life. Months went by without a single word exchanged between them. It seemed like a chapter finally closed, until one day Noor's phone rang. On the other end of the line was Zahir. He told her he was leaving Pakistan for good, moving to the US, and wanted to meet one last time to say goodbye. Noor agreed. On the evening of July 18th, she asked her driver to take her to a plaza where they had agreed to meet but didn't tell anyone at home where she was going. When Noor arrived at the plaza, she called Zahir to let him know she was there. But Zahir had other plans. "I'm busy packing," he said. "Why don't you come to my home instead?" It was the house she'd been to many times, so she didn't think much of it. A decision that unknowingly led her straight into the jaws of horror. At 10 p.m., Noor arrived at Zahir's house. She rang the bell, unaware that Zahir's parents were out of town and that he was alone with just a few household staff. After a brief hesitation, she stepped inside, trusting the man she once knew. What unfolded in this house was a series of events so bizarre and disturbing that they would shake you to your core. Zahir did not lie about his plans to travel to US. So at 11 p.m., a taxi arrived at Zahir's house to take him to the airport. The driver informed Zahir of his arrival, but Zahir told him to wait. Meanwhile, inside the house, Zahir seemed restless, making several calls to his travel agent. He asked if his ticket could be postponed so he could fly next week, but the agent explained that such a last-minute change would cost extra. Then he inquired about a refund if he didn't board the flight that night. But the answer was no. By 11:30 p.m., the taxi driver, growing impatient, called Zahir again. Once more, he was told to wait. Around midnight, Zahir finally emerged from the house. He approached the taxi and casually told the driver, "It's too late now. There's no point in going to the airport." He handed the driver 1,000 rupees and sent him away. Before leaving, taxi driver told him, "If you change your mind, you can call me back." Inside, however, something far darker was unfolding. As you can see in this CCTV footage, Noor attempts to leave the house. But Zahir physically grabs her by the arms and forcefully drags her back inside. This heartbreaking clip is a haunting glimpse into the horror Noor was about to endure over the next 30 hours. If you are enjoying the video so far, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more cases like this. Now let's get back to the video. At 2 a.m., Zahir called the taxi driver once again, asking him to return. "Maybe I can still make it to the airport," he said. From the moment Zahir dragged Noor inside to the call summoning the taxi driver, 2 harrowing hours had passed. What unfolded in those 2 hours remains a haunting mystery, yet the horrors were far from over. The worst was still to come. By 2:15 a.m., Zahir stepped out of his house with his luggage. But this time, he wasn't alone. A woman accompanied him, barefoot, her hair disheveled, her demeanor unsettling. It was Noor. During the ride, Zahir continued talking to her, but Noor sat silently, staring out of the window. Something about the scene was profoundly eerie. A few minutes into the journey, Zahir abruptly turned to the taxi driver and said, "I think it's too late to make it to the airport. Turn around and take us home." Back at the house, Zahir made a strange request to Noor. He asked her to arrange 700,000 rupees, an enormous amount of money. Desperate and frightened, Noor complied, calling her driver and instructing him to arrange the cash. "Don't tell anyone," she warned. Noor likely believed that if she secured the money, she could escape this nightmare. The driver managed to gather 300,000 rupees, less than half the amount Zahir demanded. He arrived at Zahir's residence, handing the money to one of the servants at the gate. At some point that night, Zahir proposed to Noor. It wasn't a grand romantic gesture. It was an unhinged demand. Noor, already on edge, refused without hesitation, rejecting him outright. Zahir didn't take that refusal as mere rejection. It was a blow to his fragile ego, and it sent him spiraling further into a dangerous, uncontrollable rage. Meanwhile, back at Noor's home, concern was growing. While Noor occasionally spent nights away, but by July 20th, her family began to sense something was wrong. Her father sent multiple text messages, but none received a response. Her sister's calls went unanswered, and even Noor's mother tried to reach her in vain. Panicking, the family reached out to Noor's friends, hoping she might be with one of them, but no one had seen or heard from her. Now even her friends started calling Noor, their unease growing with each unanswered ring. Noor's mother also called Zahir several times, but he did not answer. The silence was deafening, and the mystery of Noor's whereabouts was only deepening. Noor's mother finally received a call, A wave of relief washed over her when she saw Noor's name flash on the screen. She answered quickly, desperate to hear her daughter's voice. Noor, in a faint and shaky tone, told her mother that she was in Lahore, a city 5 hours away, and assured her not to worry, promising she would be home soon. Little did she know, this would be the last time she would ever hear her daughter's voice. What Noor didn't reveal was the chilling truth behind that call. Zahir had forced her, at gunpoint, to contact her mother and fabricate the lie. Moments later, Zahir himself called Noor's mother, feigning concern and assuring her that Noor wasn't with him. Back at Zahir's house on July 20th at around 4 p.m., another argument broke out between Noor and Zahir. Desperate and terrified, Noor pleaded to leave, but Zahir wouldn't let her go. She knew her life was in imminent danger, and if she wanted to survive, she had to act. Summoning every ounce of courage, Noor made a daring escape. She bolted out of the room and, in a desperate attempt to flee, jumped from the second floor of the house. Her body slammed onto the handrail below, sending a wave of searing pain through her. Despite the agony, Noor's will to live propelled her forward. She staggered towards the main gate, her freedom just within reach. But fate was not on her side. The guard stood in her way, refusing to let her leave. Before she could make another attempt, Zahir also leaped from the second floor and reached her. He forcefully dragged Noor into the guard's cabin, locking her inside. Minutes later, he stormed back, pulling her out and dragging her once again into his room. Later, the cell phone records revealed a series of calls between the house staff and Zahir's parents. The guard also called Zahir's father, Zahir Jaffer, to report the harrowing screams coming from the room, screams loud enough to alarm the neighbors. Zahir too spoke to his father several times that day. One of these calls lasted 30 minutes. What was discussed during that conversation remains a mystery forever. Meanwhile, Zahir Jaffer reached out to someone he trusted, Tahir Zahur, the CEO of Therapy Works and a psychotherapist with whom he shared a close relationship. Therapy Works is the same place where Zahir himself had repeatedly sought treatment for his drug addiction, so they had prior knowledge of Zahir's mental state. Zahir asked for Tahir's help. Zahir is out of control, he confessed. He is soliciting a girl. Please send your staff to handle the situation. But as the hours passed, the situation inside the house escalated further. Noor's screams grew louder and more desperate, piercing through the walls of the house, echoing in the ears of the staff. Tahir Zahur was also out of town, so he arranged some of his staff. Few hours later, staff from Therapy Works reached Zahir's house. Outside the house, Zahir's friends were already gathered, looking anxious and restless. Zahir had called them earlier, claiming a burglar had broken into the house and that something terrible had happened. He begged for their help. By now, house was eerily silent, with no movement or sounds coming from within. The group rang the doorbell, but no one answered. Sensing that something was terribly wrong, one of the staff members climbed over the wall and unlocked the gate from the inside. Wasting no time, the staff member grabbed a ladder and scaled the wall to reach the second floor of the house. He entered Zahir's room through a window. The room was pitch dark, and suddenly, the silhouette of a man emerged from the shadows. Zahir raised a gun and pulled the trigger, but the weapon jammed. He tried again, and when the gun failed once more, he hurled it aside in rage and lunged at the man with a knife. In the chaos, the staff member was slashed across the neck, his screams piercing the silence. Hearing the commotion, the rest of the team quickly climbed up the ladder and stormed the room. What they saw was horrifying. Zahir, wild-eyed and enraged, was attacking their colleague with the knife. They wasted no time and tackled him to the ground, managing to subdue and tie him up with ropes. As their adrenaline subsided, their eyes scanned the dimly lit room, and what they saw next froze them in terror. Their noses filled with a distinctive metallic smell. There was blood everywhere. In the corner of the room lay lifeless body. The gruesome scene was beyond anything they could have imagined. To understand what led to this unspeakable act, we need to step back and recount what took place in that room just hours earlier. Noor's screams had echoed through the house. Inside, Zahir was beating her relentlessly with brass knuckles. But Noor, despite the pain, fought back fiercely, scratching and clawing at his arms in a desperate bid to save herself. Enraged, Zahir pulled out a knife and began stabbing her repeatedly, and the blood loss was too much. Eventually, she collapsed to the floor, unconscious. What followed next was pure savagery. Without a shred of humanity, Zahir wrapped his hands around Noor's throat and squeezed until the last breath left her body. And then, he took the knife and began slicing her throat, not stopping until her head was completely severed. Once it was separated, he kicked it to the corner. Police was called, and they arrested Zahir. The post-mortem report later revealed the horrifying extent of Noor's suffering. She had been brutally beaten and raped multiple times over the course of 2 days. The news spread like wildfire, igniting outrage across Pakistan. Protests erupted nationwide, demanding justice for Noor. But what followed was nothing short of a theatrical performance. The man who had leapt effortlessly from a second-floor balcony and walked away as if it were nothing now claimed he couldn't even stand. Zahir was seen in court, being wheeled in on a stretcher, slumped in a wheelchair, or carried by others, all to present the image of a broken man. In court, he tried to convince the judge that he was mentally unfit to stand trial. But his charade didn't last long. The judge ordered a psychiatric evaluation, and the truth came out. Zahir was perfectly sane, capable of standing trial, and fully aware of his actions. While he was declared an alcoholic and drug addict, there was no evidence to support his claims of mental instability. During the investigation, police discovered that Zahir had never completed his education. He was called back from the United States due to his worsening drug addiction. Contrary to his claims, he was not a certified therapist. Instead, he had been admitted to therapy works as a patient. However, he began visiting schools, giving lectures on mental health, and pretending to work for Therapy Works. Whether the CEO of Therapy Works was aware of this deception, but remained silent due to the influence and donations of Zahir's family, remains a matter of speculation. Justice was swift. Zahir Jaffer was sentenced to death for his heinous crimes. The guard, the cook, and the house help, who had stood by and failed to intervene, each received 10-year sentences. As for Zahir's parents, their involvement in the case raised many questions, but ultimately they were released without any charges. And so, the chapter of this tragedy closed in the courtroom. We've now reached the end of this video. Due to time constraints, I couldn't dive into every detail of this case. But don't worry, I'll be uploading a separate video that provides an overview of the entire case. You can find the link in the pinned comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this heartbreaking case. Let me know in the comments. And until next time, stay safe and stay vigilant.